I can't hear you. Still, there you are. Now you're gone. My volume is on. Craig, you sound like a chipmunk. Sorry, students, we're having technical difficulties. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear Professor Wilcox. I don't know if I can be heard. Can you hear me? Okay.
Is that any better?
Yeah, now that's better. Good.
Okay, good.
All right, Professor Wilcox has lost his voice.
Nice.
So we can, I guess we can just carry on.
Okay, let me just pull up this, let me just get the class up in the background here.
Okay. So welcome, students. Sorry for the rough start here. We're all, it's mid-semester. We're all tired. It's late at night.
And apparently I'm a chipmunk.
Apparently one of us has morphed into a chipmunk, which is always unsettling, to say the least. But all is restored. And one of us has gone silent, which is also worrisome, but hopefully he'll regain his voice before too long. Anyway, tonight is about Unit 3. Yes, scales, keys, etc. I think our usual routine is to sort of go through some of the homeworks and talk to you about basically how to do the homework rather than trying to reteach all of the material, because it's all right there in the lessons for you, waiting for you to read and peruse. And sometimes the toughest part is just the nitty-gritty of how do I actually just do this darn assignment. So we can focus on that. I will share my screen, which I have the course up, and then the another feature of tonight should be, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Should be the creative project, which I'm sure you're all thrilled and excited about. It is probably one of the more interesting and useful aspects of the course we think for the students, because it gives you a chance to actually put all of your knowledge to use, and it's very revealing often of sort of where certain knowledge points are, and it's often very fun for the students, and people find that, oh my God, I didn't think I could do this, but actually I can, and that it's very gratifying. Some of you may be feeling intimidated or nervous about the creative project, which is understandable, because some of you may never have been asked to compose and perform a piece of music before. And when you put it that way, like, hey, I'm a chemistry major and I've never done anything with music, and I'm being asked to compose a piece and perform it myself, that's kind of scary. But that every single one of the students in all of the sections, hundreds and hundreds of students for several years, have all done this assignment with great success. Do it too. So without further ado, since I have this up, Craig, do you want me to do this assignment and then
I'll
tag team it? Maybe?
And I'll prep the second one.
Okay. So yeah, music theory is sort of built in building blocks, and semitones and whole tones are two of the primal building blocks. If you ever played with Legos, think of them as two sizes of Lego. One is half the size of the other one. You may know these as half steps and whole steps, and that's exactly the same thing. Being misled by the terminology, we just use the slightly sounding semitone and whole tone. And this is asking you just to identify which is which. And not only that, but chromatic versus diatonic. And that's where things get a little bit trickier. But as with so much of this, what you really need to know is sort of, you need to just, I think when it comes down to the assignment, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just figure out a way, something to memorize that's concrete, that just gets you through it. And so even if the term chromatic and diatonic, those terms are a little bit technical and tricky to remember, just remember this. Chromatic means that are the same letter name and they're the same line or space on the staff. Diatonic means that they're two different letter names and two different locations on the staff. So just at the really basic level, you see these first two. The first example, the two notes are exactly in the same position vertically. They're both spaced below the bottom line of the staff, and that they're both the letter D, the note D. They have different accidentals, which is why they're not the same exact note. That's why they're a semitone apart, just giving away the answer here. And because they're on the same space and the same name, they are a chromatic semitone, as opposed to these two notes, which are, I'm not going to give away the answer this time, but if they were a semitone, which they may or may not be, they would be a diatonic one because they are two different notes. So as long as you can remember that basic fact. And so the other, I guess there's one other basic distinction, which is semitone versus whole tone. And of course, that's important. And one thing that can be really helpful for this, I find, is the piano keyboard. And piano keyboard, even if you don't play piano, as a kind of mental map of what I recommend strongly is bring it up on the screen or draw it out for yourself. And you can tones. And the basic definition is that if the two notes are right next to each other with no note in between, then it's a semitone. One note in between, one key on the keyboard in between the two notes that you're looking at, then it's a whole tone. So in summary, if you can chromatic and diatonic and whole tone and semitone, you're good to go on this assignment. And page 2, let me just make sure I haven't. Uh-oh. I thought I had installed Flash. Oh no. Anyway, I guess I'm being kind of useless here, but this is basically, if you can do the part 1, you can do part 2. It's just a different way of getting at the problem. In other words, before we're asking you to identify what's on the staff, now we ask you to actually create the note by dragging staff. And I apologize for my technical here. I will fix it while Professor Levesque takes over for the next assignment.
Okay, so I will share my screen. And hopefully we can all see that now. And we are going to look at homework 16. Now, the first page of this has a lot of different ways of saying the same thing. So in example 1, you have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I'm not going to sing the song. Question 2, we have tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant. And down here, we actually have scale degree. And those are all 3 different ways of saying the same thing, which is you have the starting point of a scale. In this case, they're giving it to us in C major. C is our starting point, and then the scale degrees, names, and the solfege syllables are all ways of identifying a step above that starting pitch. So do is the first step. That means in C major, C would be do. If we were in D major, D would be do. If we were in A major, A would be do. Do is also 3, which is also the tonic. And I know a lot of you guys have been questions about the tonic and the leading tone because of the creative project. And we'll talk about those a little bit later when we talk about the creative project a little more. So on this first page, what you have to do is first identify what note you have, E, and then you have to relate that to do. So in this case, if we have C as do, which it is, then it would be do, re, mi, 1, 2, 3, or tonic, supertonic, and then mediant, all meaning the same thing, which is the 3rd degree of the scale. The mistake that everyone makes with this particular assignment is they forget to count the first note, the tonic note, as 1. So a lot of people would look at this and say, oh, well, C is 1 point, so D is 1 and E is 2. But we don't start from 0. We would never say C is the 0th note of the C major scale. It's always the first note. So just keep in mind when you're doing this, it's all about figuring how many steps above your starting note you are. In this case, it's C major. And then identifying correctly the name that goes with it. Do, tonic. Now the second page is building up or identifying these scale patterns. And really, this is not much different than the last exercise that Dr. McClellan was talking about, where we had to identify whole tones or semitones. It's just in this particular one, we're doing it in a scalar form in more than one at a time. And also, they're all going to be diatonic tones because it's part of a scale. So we take a look at the scale that's given, and we want to mark the whole tones between adjacent pitches in the given scale. So you would look and say, okay, is a whole tone, A to B, a whole tone, B to C. That's our semitone. Remember, B to C and E to F are the two natural semitones. Whole tone, whole tone. Here's our other semitone, and whole tone. So here we're identifying the pattern as we see it, same as we did in the last exercise, only it's in a scalar form. And this is in preparation for the exercise where we're building a major scale by adding accidentals with the whole half pattern, which is coming up. Okay, I think that's basically how we do exercise 16. Your technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think they're solved. In fact, it was just a matter of one click, which I didn't realize it was that easy, but I'm back up. So I can talk about the next one. Hang on. So this is assignment homework 17, and this one, on the face of it, I think can be a little intimidating because you're given this pitch, and sort of out of the blue, you have to identify its harmonic function within a certain key. So it's important to break this down into steps, and once you do that, as long as you follow those steps methodically, it can be quite simple. It does require a solid knowledge of the harmonic function names. And if you recall in the lessons, every note in a given scale has 3 different possible ways of being named. And they're really completely equivalent. They have different purposes, but they don't mean anything different from each other. So scale degree 1 is called scale degree 1. That's one of its names. It's also called the tonic. That's an alternate name for the same exact note. And then the third name for it is do. And so they each have different purposes, but you have to be fluent in translating from one to the other. So I find that the scale degree numbers are the easiest. It's a matter of counting. So as long as I can identify the number, the scale degree number, and that's step 1, and then as long as I can translate it to the harmonic function name, that's step 2, then I can know what I'm talking about. And there's a third step here, which is to find the tonic of the given scale, and then figure out where your note that you're shown on the staff is in relation to that tonic. And this first one actually is a little tricky because you have to get used to counting up and down. And so let me just walk you through this very first one. You're given the pitch on this bass clef, and that's an F, a very low F. And so your first task is what scale degree number is F in the key of A minor? In other words, given this pitch, and what's its position in this scale that you're given relative to the tonic? And so the easiest way usually is to count down from the note down to the tonic, and then you can get the number. So the reason I said this is tricky is because if you do that here, you're going to go way, way low down through all these ledger lines. So I'm going to sort of mentally translate this up an octave to the F on this line, and then I'm going to count downward, starting from the F as I get to A. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get to the A. And then I'm going to, I don't know if I'm explaining this very clearly, but you're basically trying to figure out how high above. And so now I'm going to count back the other direction. And again, as Dr. Levesque said, there's no 0. So A is the tonic, that's 1. 2 is B, 3 is C, 4 is D, 5 is E, and 6 is F. And so now I know that F is the 6th scale degree, number 6. And then the last and final step is to translate to name. And it so happens it's called the submediant. So that's your answer. And again, so it's a number of different steps, but if you're comfortable with those steps, you can do these very reliably. And it asks for different things. Sometimes it's a little bit simpler because you're looking at the scale degree. And that ability to count and not miss a number and make sure you're always counting from 1 rather than 0 is really key in this assignment. And feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing, I mean, you did cover this, but I just want to make it more explicit. In the example that he gave, where F was the submediant of A, to every single F in the key of A. So it doesn't matter by octave. And, you know, it can be confusing sometimes, as you mentioned, having to count both up and having down. But the submediant in the key of A is every F, not just the F immediately above what the A that you pick to start from, but every single F. So just remember that we're talking about notes in a key in this instance.
Yeah, and another way that you could do this, and with all of these, it's important to kind of find your personal way that works for you, and it may be a little quirky even, or sort of to someone else, it might be like, why would you do it that way? But as long as it works for you, as long as it's reliable. So just as a suggestion, another way that you could do this is learn to count the scale degrees and the harmonic function names down from the tonic. And it's actually listed that way here. Sorry, I'm wrong about that. But if you think of the scale upside down, in other words, so tonic is the bottom note, but if you start at the top, the second top note, which is the leading tone or the subtonic, and that's a whole other discussion, but make sure that you are clear on the fact that those are both scale degree 7, and then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the reason I say all that is that you could theoretically say, know that A is the tonic, it's this note. The next note down from the tonic is scale degree 7, and the next note down from that is scale degree 6. So in a way, that's a more direct route than I suggested before. So if that works for you, that's another way you could do it. Scale backwards and forwards in terms of all of the names, scale degree names and functions and so on, and solfege syllables. Absolutely, it's core to this course. What Dr. Levesque pointed out is that any F or any A has the same function. It doesn't matter what octave it's in, and that's really important to know as a foundation for all of these. So here again, we're sort of flipping you from identifying to actively creating, and it takes a little bit of practice, but just remember that the reason that we box the middle 6 notes is that the tonic note is always a given. So we're never going to ask you to change or modify the tonic, because then you'd be changing the entire scale. So it's always a question of fiddling with the notes in between and getting the accidentals and the sharps and flats right. And so now we get into the whole question of the scale patterns, and similar to some of the other assignments, you have to be really solid on these. So I'll just do one sample. So C sharp minor. The way that I tend to do this is just be really, really methodical, counting from the tonic and knowing your scale pattern. And just DNA of your scale, you have to follow it, or you end up with a different organism. And you don't want that. You want the DNA to come out as your nice scale that you expected, not as some kind of crazy cyborg with tentacles in all directions. So in other words, the scale pattern for a minor scale is whole step. And we want a whole step from tonic to, or scale degree 1 to scale degree 2, then half step semitone from 2 to 3, whole tone 3 to 4, whole to 4 to 5, and then half 5 to 6, and whole 6 to 7, and whole 7 to 8. So I'll just briefly, I won't belabor this, but that will give us C sharp to D sharp to get a whole step or whole tone. D sharp to E is already a half step, so you're good. E to F sharp, G sharp, and then G sharp is already a half step or semitone to A, and then you have whole tones up the rest of the way. So you're adding a sharp to D, and then you're going to put in, so it'll look like this. Whoops. Thought I was grabbing a sharp. And just to show you how to do this sort of on a physical level, you're literally dragging and dropping. It's very clever the way this was designed by Dr. Wilcox, so that when you have the sharps in the right place, make sure they're not over here. That's not going to work. Or up here. That they have to be directly in front of the note. And if you do that correctly, code, and then this is also key to enter the code exactly as you see it. Just be really literal minded about it. Don't second guess it in any way. It's literally just 2S, 3, 4S, 5S, 6, 7, and you're done. You don't include the 1 and the 8. Explanation, but once you get used to this, it will be quite simple. Should we go through, I'm just wondering if we should go through all, I feel like I'm being overly detailed, and maybe we should.
I can jump to the next one quickly at least. I'll go fast maybe. So it's funny, in my head I'm now singing the Do a Deer song, but with the scale degrees, going a deer, feet, supertonic. It doesn't work. Anyway, okay. So here we are with making scales, and we're going to do the exact same procedure that Dr. McClellan just talked about, but now with major scales instead of minors. So again, this because there's some more difficult things we have to go over later on. But if I get a whole step from B to C sharp, then a whole step from C sharp to D sharp, half step to E, then we want a whole step E to F sharp, whole step F sharp to G sharp, and then G sharp to A sharp as our final whole step. The major pattern is really easy to remember. It just kind of flows off the tongue. Whole, whole, half, a whole, whole, half. Tone, half tone, whole tone, whole tone, whole tone, half tone. So hopefully that's easy to remember and easy to manipulate. If you can do the minors, then you can definitely do the majors. Now the second and third exercises have to do with, or pages in this exercise have to do with the harmonic and melodic minor scales. And this is interesting because this gets at the heart of what is the subtonic versus the leading tone. So in the harmonic minors, 7th scale degree by 1 semitone. The mistake everyone makes with this exercise is not looking at the key signature first. So first to identify what the leading tone, what the 7th scale degree is in minor. In this case, it is an E natural. If it is unaltered, that is the subtonic, and the subtonic is 1 whole step below the tonic. Now we want to raise this by a half step. In this case, that means adding a sharp. Instinct often going to be just to chuck a natural on there and walk away. And that would be correct if this had been an E flat to start. So let's see, for this example, for instance, to raise this E flat by a half step, we would in fact want an E natural. I knew that that natural was the appropriate one because I first assessed what it was in the beginning. And to give you a real extreme example, here we want to raise this subtonic up to a leading tone to make it harmonic minor scale, but it's already a G sharp, which is why we need this wonderful fancy called the double sharp to raise the G sharp even a half step higher. And following on the third page of this exercise, we have melodic minor scales, which is the only scale that is different going up as it is going down. On the way up, you raise the 6th and 7th steps to G sharp. First, we have to raise the F sharp from F double sharp. And then we have to raise the 6th degree also. Natural, it is now in E sharp. So ascending, we have E sharp and F double sharp. Descending, we need to revert it back to signature. So the double sharp turns back into a single sharp. And the E sharp becomes an E natural. So on the way down, identical to what it did on the way up. However, remember that you have to use accidentals to cancel out the accidentals that you added on the way back in. So while it is identical going down to the unaltered way going up, it doesn't look at accidentals that you have to counteract. So melodic and harmonic minor. It gives you a chance to really practice and get into understanding the issue of subtonic versus leading tone. The 7th scale would be before it is altered, as it is here is the subtonic. By a half step to form just a half step below the tonic, then it is the leading tone. Okay, so do you want to jump back in on, do you want to jump over to 19? And we'll just kind of...
Sure. I think I have it here. Yeah, so I'm going to be really quick with this one because I want to get on to the creative project, but there's just a quick trick to key signature. Well, there's two issues here. One is minor versus major, and just go to the circle of fifths in lesson 5 and imprint it on your brain in stone. I'm mixing metaphors, but just be absolutely 100% clear on the circle of fifths, and is the relative majors and minors like C major and A minor, so that you know which is major versus minor. But the first step is to know which set of major and minor relative keys you're dealing with, and that's determined by the key signature. And so again, just a quick trick for key signatures that people is that with sharp keys, the last sharp to the right. So I'm going to find one down. Well, it applies to anyone, so I'll start with G. Is the leading tone of the major key. So you can start with the major key, and just as a quick trick, you can say F sharp is the leading tone, so one half step higher is the tonic, and then that's your tonic of the major key, and then you can, in this case, from there say down 6 notes is E, and that's the tonic of your minor, relative minor key. So the same trick works with this one. C sharp is the last sharp toward the right. A half step up is D. So D is the major key. Down 3 or up 6 is the minor key, which is B. And that works for anyone. This one over here is D sharp. So one step up is E major, and then the minor is C sharp, so on. But the flats also have a trick, which is that the second to last flat, so in this case, the furthest to the right is D flat, second to last is A flat, and that's the tonic of the major key. So in that case, A minor. These are all minor, well, not all of them. You can, here we have the second to the right is B flat, and so for that key signature is B flat, then down 3 is G, and up 6. So it's G minor, and so on. So that's kind of probably too quick, but just making sure we cover that little trick. Yeah. Do you want to do 20, and then we can? I'll be getting the creative project ready.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. If there's one bit of advice I would add to what's going on before, is that it really is in your best interest to memorize the key signatures in as much as you can. The problem is that everything you do, not only in this unit, but in later units, is built off of key signatures. And if you don't have those clearly, then you're always going to be at a disadvantage. If you can memorize, you certainly can memorize 12 key signatures and 12 minor keys. It's really not a lot. It's just that you know, you have to spend the time to do it and drill yourself in practice. Okay, so back to this. We have relative and parallel scales. These are just other ways to test the things that we've already done. So we start with some word problems, essentially. The relative major key of D sharp minor. So in that case, you figure out what D sharp minor is. Go to D sharp and go up a minor third, 3 half steps to find the relative major. In this case, it's F sharp major. One thing I would point out, mistake that you're going to find with these more complicated key signatures is that you're not ever going to mix flats and sharps. So if your counting for D sharp minor gets you to F major, that should set off a warning flag because F major is a flat key, while D sharp minor, because the sharp in the title is clearly a sharp key, and you can't mix the flats and sharps. The parallel minor key of B flat major, flat, you think, okay, well, what is now 3 half steps down from B flat, or what is the 6th step of B flat major? You can get to that answer from there. This is just more ways of testing the same thing. So, second page, harmonic function major. Here's where not knowing your key signatures quickly and accurately is really going to hurt you. Key signature, what is the harmonic function of the given note? The very first step is that you have to understand that this is G flat major. Using Dr. McClelland's trick, the second to last flat is G flat. Once you know that G flat is the tonic, then you can go up one step to get to A flat as the supertonic. And again, harmonic function are your tonic, supertonic, as opposed to scale degree, which would be 2, and solfege, which would be re. And then we have harmonic function minor. So the same deal here as before. First, identify the key signature. The major key for this would be A flat major. We want the minor, so the parallel minor to A flat is F, and I got that by either going down 3 or up 6. Once we know that this is F major, then we can count up and we can discover that E flat is the 7th step of the scale. Now, in this case, the 7th step would be the subtonic. And I know it's a subtonic because it hasn't been raised by a half step. And in minor, raising it by the half step is what you do to become the leading tone. Interestingly enough, if I look down here, what is the minor key signature? Based on the minor key, what is harmonic function of the given note? It's pretty, not completely 100%, but it's very likely that this is actually going to be a leading tone because it is a raised note, that half step, and the notes that we raise in minor are either 6 or 7. So we have a step above that last sharp gets us G major. We know that G major, the relative minor is E minor, either going up 6 or down 3. 7th step of E, and because it's raised a half step, it is the leading tone and not the subtonic. But again, I made an assumption that that would be the case when I saw that it was a note raised, and I remember that only the leading tones and sometimes the 6th scale degree get raised in minor. So this exercise is not hard. It's really just kind of a mashup of earlier exercises, and as long as you know your key signatures by this point, which hopefully everyone will, then this one should go pretty quickly. Okay, so.
Cool. All right, should I jump in on the creative project? So, yeah, so as I said before, some of you may find this intimidating, but do not be intimidated. As with the entire course, if you are methodical, careful, and you work hard on it, and you show that you've put in an effort, you're going to do well grade-wise. So I want to just call out a few things. I'm not going to really spell out every detail of this, but a few key points that we often see people falling down on. And one of them is simply the nuts and bolts of the assignment. So for example, we give you a very specific way to name the files. This might seem like, well, why are they so concerned about such a detail? It really, really, really matters. So don't shirk that part of it. Read it carefully, follow it to the letter, and you will be in good shape. There are important reasons why we have to ask that because there are so many of you and so few of us. Another detail we've gotten a couple of questions about is the difference between Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost. We do know they're not the same poet. They're both great American poets, but we have a slight typo due to a change of poetry that we did from last semester to this. This is a Robert Frost poem, which is wonderful. And then I want to just jump in on these little rubrics here. Read these very carefully and make sure you know exactly what they mean. So for example, make sure the rhythmic values add up correctly in the meter. What does that mean? As an example, if you are in 4/4 time and you have and an eighth note and a dotted quarter note, think carefully, does that add up correctly? Well, 2/16 and an eighth equals a quarter, and then another dotted quarter equals a quarter and a half, and then that's 2.5 quarters, and you're short for the measure as a whole. So you have to be really, there's nothing automatic. If you're somebody who uses a notation program like Noteflight or Finale, well, not Finale, but some of those programs will always make sure that you have the right meter automatically no matter what you do. This program is not going to do that for you. So we deliberately design it so that you can mess up. So make sure you don't. Similarly, don't use a key signature. Instead, add sharps or flats to each note. We see a lot of key signatures. Just don't read every little detail carefully. Understandable, but just don't let that be you. Make sure that everything's to the letter. And that's sort of the point is, again, I'm not going to go through every detail, but.
So to that point about the key signature, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. To that point about the key signature, not writing in the key signature doesn't mean that you don't actually have one. The key signature is what determines the notes you can use. It determines the overall collection. So if you're using D major, then you still need to use D major. It's just that you're adding all the F sharps and C sharps manually front. So even though you're not using a key signature, you have to still be using a key. It's a notation issue. It's not changing the collection of notes that you're actually using.
Yeah, thank you for emphasizing that, because it's an important point. And think of it as showing your work in a math problem. It's like we want to see that you know exactly which notes have the sharps or the flats. It's simply a matter, we're sort of actually asking you to do something a little bit non-standard, but it's for the sake of showing your work so that we know that you know what you're doing. That's a slight quirk that is for a good reason, but it's tricky. Yeah, and then another point that people get confused about or worry about is performance accuracy. Sometimes we get people saying, well, how could I ever possibly perform a melody? I'm not a musician. And our answer to that is, well, slow that you have time to think about each and every note and place your hand on the piano or whatever instrument you're using and then press the note down carefully. Like, it can be so slow or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is accuracy. We're not looking for something that would fire up a crowd at Carnegie Hall. We're looking for a demonstration that you know what you're doing.
And also, it's a good idea to practice before you do your final recording. You know, I like to make the analogy, it's like you have to read a sentence or two or a paragraph in a language that you've only just started learning. If you had to go into a Spanish class and read something in Spanish, you would not want your first attempt to be in front of the class. You practice it, you try the words out slowly, you make sure you're doing it properly. So, you know, run through it a bunch of times before you make that final recording. Don't just go, whoops, here it goes, try it the once it's under along.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Again, it's about sort of showing your best work, being methodical, and don't be nervous, and don't feel that there's some expectation that you have to be some kind of fantastic musician. We've seen people with no experience do amazing work just because they were careful and thoughtful about it. And careful and thoughtful also describes your approach to your analysis. And again, I'm not going to go into too much depth, but we want really specific answers to these three questions. And evidence. Think of this as a scientific, paper that proves your point scientifically from the evidence, which is your melody. So we want you to be as specific as possible. We don't want you to say, well, I liked my melody because it just sounded really great to me. We want you to say, the second note from the end was a C sharp, and I chose that note as opposed to a D sharp because it had the effect related to this other note, and go really into the nitty gritty within the word limit, so that we know exactly what you were thinking, and that's a really important component of this as well. So I don't know if there's anything else. I want to make sure we don't go on too long, but I also don't want to shortchange anybody. Is there anything else that's...
Let me just show one thing real quick. If I could jump and share for a moment.
Please, yeah.
So here we are in the creative project phase, creative project page. There we go. Words, tough. One of the things I'd suggest doing is right on this page, once you understand what key you're going to use, you can actually give yourself that collection in obtrusive space. So just to give you an example, if I decide I want to use the key of E flat major, probably going to do myself the favor of giving myself either on this page or on scrap paper in front of me. I'm doing it on the page because obviously I can't show you the scrap paper in front of me. I'm going to take the time to actually make sure that I understand and remember the collection that I'm using. What I'm doing is I'm making myself an E flat major scale. So now, when I look back up here to make my melody in E flat, I can reference these notes so that I know when I have an A, oh yeah, it has to be an A flat.
That's a great point. And I just want to point out a nice touch that Dr. Levesque made there, which is stem direction, making sure that notes below the middle line go up and above the middle line go down. So just a nice thing that notation does. It makes things kind of fit better on the staff. So little things like that go a long way.
And the other thing I'll mention, sorry, I forgot to add a time signature. Free time. One method you can use if you are having trouble, especially with the rhythmic aspect of things, is to start with a very easy, simple, correct rhythm. I'm using all quarter notes. Sorry. And then to elaborate from there. So I know that in 4/4, 4 quarter notes is sort of the simplest, safest rhythm I can do. If I start with that, then I can think, well, okay, I know that 4/4 is the simplest I can do, but I also know that I can break up into 2/8 notes. So now if I take out this 1 quarter note and replace it with 2/8 notes, I know that I still have the right number of beats because I'm starting from a place of consistent and making it more complex. And I also know that a quarter note can be worth an 1/8 and 2/16. Take away that quarter note and add an 1/8 note and 2/16. Again, I can do that while being assured that my rhythm remains intact and that I have the right number of beats. Sorry. Real stickler when it comes to notation. Part of my job. There, that's a little better.
Note about this too is some of you who may have a bit more musical background, you'll wonder why aren't there beams connecting the notes? And that's again, we're asking you to do something a little bit non-standard, simply for the sake of this notation tool. It would be way too complicated to provide a million different little combinations for beams. So it's technically there should be beams, in an ideal world, but we're gonna let you off the hook on that. You do not have to do beams.
Okay, so also in this exercise, you can see I began and ended on my tonic, which was E flat. There's my leading tone, right where it should be before my final note. I went up the octave, my final E flat, I guess because that's the kind of guy I am today. But the important thing is that I began and ended on E flat, which is my tonic, and I preceded it by the leading tone. It's in 4/4. My key had 3 flats, so it fit that requirement. You can see the 3 flats down here now. And I know the rhythms all work, in part because I started from simple rhythms and made it more complex through ornamentation with like, oh, I'm going to do 6 16th notes followed by 3 8th notes, and then I have no idea where I am. So
That's
all
a
those
really
things
great strategy. Yeah.
good ways to approach these particular writing projects.
Excellent.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I think maybe we should call it a wrap. Is there anything we've missed?
I don't think so. I would just like to say that the activity on Piazza and the forums has been fantastic. Students have been jumping right in and answering, and it's been really great. It's been a really great community back and forth on there. Hopefully we haven't missed any questions, but we're trying to get in there basis and get those answered. But I want to hats off to you guys for getting in there and asking good questions and answering each other's questions. It's been very good this semester.
Yeah, and always remember that if you're asking a question, almost guaranteed there's a bunch of other people who have the exact same question, so you're doing them a huge favor. So don't ever hesitate to ask a question, because you're helping yourself and you're helping your others, and likewise with answering them, it's wonderful to see that interaction. Absolutely. So, and with that, we wish you a good night. Feel free to ask follow-up questions on the Piazza page for this video event, and tell your friends to watch it if they missed it. If they're in this class, well, if they're not in the class, you know what? They can watch it too. It's probably very entertaining for them.
Oh yeah, it's a great way to spend a Friday night.
Sure is. Beats Hulu any day.
Right. Netflix and chill, music theory review and chill. We got you covered.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh boy.
Yeah. All right. Well, and we will next time. We'll hope. Next time we'll hope that Dr. Wilcox has his voice back. Yeah, I think that's a wrap. Good night, everybody.
Good night.